So let's go ahead and look at this, some of these examples of the graphs so you can kind of get the hang of those. So in this one it says, a diver dives 50 feet in 10 minutes. He stays there for 30 minutes and then he resurfaces. So you have this idea that you have some kind of diver that's going to go down the water, stay there for a while, and come back up. So when you're looking at the graphs to choose, pay attention to how the sides are actually labeled. So the two in this one say feet below sea level. So when it's at 0, right there at the very beginning, they're at the top of the water. So when it says feet below, if it were to get up here, that means that it is 50 feet below the sea level. So it looks a little different than people expect. So this one says that he goes down 50 feet in 10 minutes. So in 10 minutes, there's 50 feet below. You can see he dove down to get there. Then he stays there for 30 minutes. So for 30 minutes, he stays 50 feet below the water. If he resurfaces in 10 minutes, that means that he's actually going to go back to the sea level to actually get to the level of the water at 0 there. Okay, so your job is to take the story and try to match it with the actual graphs that you have choices to look at. Okay, so take a look at this one. This one says that a child rides around on a Ferris wheel twice. So think about some picture of a Ferris wheel. You can imagine there's your little chair where you get on at the bottom. So this height would be 0 right here because you're getting on. And as I go up, it goes up till it gets to the highest up here, right? And then it's going to go back down. When it comes back down, it's going to get back to ground level. And then it goes up to the highest and then comes back down. Now it tells you it's done this twice. So if I take a look at the graph that I have here, I start at 0. You can see it goes up to its highest spot. So right here is where it's going to match on the top of the graph, the highest spot that you get on the actual Ferris wheel. Then it goes back down to the bottom. So when it gets down here, that's where you're at the bottom of the Ferris wheel. Goes back up to the top one more time and comes back down. So really what you're trying to do, again, find the story that matches the pictures so you can kind of figure out how that works. Okay, now this one says that a man drives from home to the store, he shops, and then he drives back. So if you take a look again, remember we said it's important to look at the two sides of the graph. So the distance from home, so when you start out at 0, 0 right here, your distance from home is 0 because you're actually at home. So if he goes to the store, imagine he's driven some amount of time away from home, and then the distance stops because he stays at the store for a while. And then he's going to drive back. So when he gets back here, he's going to be 0 away from home because he's actually gotten there. Okay, now select all the following that are ordered pairs for the given function. So I have this function that I'm going to mess with. So let me take this and actually just move it over a little bit here. So I'm going to use this function kind of over and over again to see how this works. But I want you to notice right here, these are all x values. So if I were to take these x values one at a time, I should be able to plug them in here and see what number I get out. And remember, whatever number I get out will be my y value. Okay, so if I look at this first one, I'm going to take this -2 and plug it in. So if I plug in -2 and I plug that into my calculator, I'm going to get 7 out of it. So that gives me the point of -2 for x, and I get out 7 for y. Now that does not match this point because I had 1 as the y value. So we're going to plug them in one at a time and see what we get. So this next one, I'm going to plug in -1. So I plug in -1 there. And if I plug that in my calculator, I get out 5. So when I plug in -1, I get out 5. Now that actually matches that point there. So I'm trying to see how many are going to match. So next one, I get 0. So I'm going to go through and plug in 0. And if I plug that in my calculator, I get 3 out. So plug in 0 and get 3 out. So that point matches. Okay, next one is 1. So now I'm going to plug that in. And if I plug that in my calculator, I'm going to get 1. So I plug in 1, I get 1 out. Now that does not match this point because I had 0 for y. Okay, next one plugs in 2. So if I plug that in my calculator, I get -1. So 2, -1, which matches that. So you're just trying to see how many of those actual points work. So just make sure when you're looking at it, you're checking all the x values and plugging them in to see if the y value matches it. Okay. Now this one says, which of the following values would complete the ordered pair if the point on the graph is this equation? So if I have this piece that's here, they give me this value, so that tells me that x is -1. So I'm going to plug in my -1 there. And then I'm going to plug that in my calculator. So if I plug that in, I get 5 out, which matches that. Okay, so when you're doing just those plug and chug ones, that's what you're kind of looking for. Okay? Okay, let's look at the graph one. That's kind of our last piece. So this is my equation. Oops. So realize whenever you see f of x, you can replace that with y if that helps. Now, most of the time, if you're trying to figure these out, I would probably plug in for x, like 0, 1, 2, and then see if those points are actually on the graph. So if I go to the first one, let's actually plug in 0. So if I plug in 0 and then I plug that in my calculator, I would get 0. So when x is 0, y is 0. And that would be one of the points in your graph. So that would match right there. Now, do you see how they actually have another point here? It looks like it's actually when x is 2. So let's plug in x is 2 and see what we get. So I'm going to plug in 2 here. And if I plug that in my calculator, I get -1. So 2, -1 is going to be my point, which would be right there. And that will give you enough to make your line. Now this is the big stuff. Usually when you plug in, if you can use small numbers like x equals 0 or 1 or 2, that's probably the easiest, okay? Okay, go through the rest of them. If you have more questions, let me know.